The smoke billowed across the horizon like a storm cloud gathering at dusk, but it was only mid-afternoon in the New Mexico territory of 1875. Sarah Vaughn gripped the leather seat of the stagecoach as it careened wildly around the bend, flames licking at the wooden frame beneath her feet. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild Mustang, the heat searing her skin through her dress as the mountainous landscape of Los Alamos blurred past the windows. "Jump! For God's sake, jump now!" shouted the elderly woman beside her, moments before the side door burst open from the force of the coach hitting a boulder. Sarah had never imagined her journey west would end like this. Just 22 years old and fleeing a life of societal constraints in Boston, she had spent her last dollars on this stagecoach ticket, chasing dreams of independence and maybe, someday, a home of her own. Now, as flames consumed the rear compartment and the horses screamed in terror, those dreams seemed to be turning to ash. The driver was already gone thrown from his perch minutes ago, when the bandits' bullets had found their mark. Sarah could still hear their whooping and hollering as they'd ridden away with the strongbox, leaving the burning stagecoach to careen down the mountain pass. "I can't," Sarah cried out, but the elderly woman had already flung herself from the opposite door into a patch of scrub brush. The stagecoach lurched again, and Sarah felt herself sliding toward the open door. The ground below was a blur of dust and rocks. Her fingers clutched desperately at the smooth leather, finding no purchase. In that moment, she made her choice: better to jump than burn. With a prayer on her lips, Sarah Vaughn launched herself into the air, her blue traveling dress billowing around her like the wings of a bird taking flight for the first time. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact of hard earth and sharp stone. Instead, she felt strong arms catch her, the momentum knocking her savior backward as they both tumbled to the ground. When she opened her eyes, she found herself staring into the weathered face of a man with eyes the color of the New Mexico sky. "I've got you," he said, his voice as steady as his hands had been. A young child, no more than 4 years old, stood a few paces back, eyes wide with wonder and fear. The man sat up, still cradling Sarah, and looked at the burning stagecoach as it continued its wild descent down the mountain. "Stay forever," he added softly, almost to himself, as if her arrival had answered some unspoken prayer of his own. Sarah didn't know then that those 2 words would change the course of her life. She didn't know that the man who had caught her, Jackson Zimmerman, a cattle rancher and widowed father, would become her refuge in this wild, untamed land. And she certainly couldn't have known that his impulsive words, spoken in a moment of adrenaline and relief, would someday become her most treasured promise. The stagecoach exploded in a shower of sparks at the bottom of the ravine, and Sarah fainted in the stranger's arms. When Sarah awoke, the first thing she noticed was the smell pine and wood smoke, with undertones of leather and coffee. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness forced her back down onto what she now realized was a simple but comfortable bed. "Easy there," came a gentle voice from across the room. "You took quite a tumble." Sarah turned toward the sound and found the man who had caught her, sitting in a wooden chair by a stone fireplace. The small child she had glimpsed earlier was asleep on his lap, head tucked against his chest. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy from smoke and thirst. "My ranch, about 3 miles outside of Los Alamos." He shifted carefully, trying not to wake the sleeping child, and reached for a tin cup on a small table beside him. "Here, drink this. It's just water." Sarah managed to prop herself up on her elbow and accepted the cup gratefully. As she drank, she studied her surroundings. The cabin was modest but tidy, with rough-hewn furniture and simple decorations. A pair of deer antlers hung above the fireplace, and a collection of books stood neatly on a shelf. "I'm Jackson Zimmerman," he said when she had finished drinking. "This here's my son, Daniel." "Sarah Vaughn," she replied, setting the empty cup on a small bedside table. I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You saved my life." Jackson's face remained serious, but his eyes softened. Anyone would have done the same. "Not anyone could have caught a woman flying through the air from a burning stagecoach," Sarah countered, attempting a small smile despite her pain. This earned her a brief chuckle. "I suppose ranching builds strong arms." He glanced down at his son, whose face twitched in sleep. "Daniel and I were heading into town for supplies when we saw the smoke. By the time we got to you, the other passengers had already jumped or." He trailed off, his expression growing somber. "Were there others who didn't make it?" Sarah asked, her heart sinking. Jackson nodded gravely. "The driver, and I believe there was another man well-dressed, older." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering the banker from Denver who had boarded with them 2 stops ago. "Mr. Holloway," she said softly. "He was traveling to see his grandchildren." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Daniel's soft breathing. "What about the elderly woman?" Sarah finally asked. "Mrs. Patterson. She jumped before I did." "Sheriff Thompson found her. Broken arm, but she'll live. She's being tended to in town." Jackson shifted slightly, and Daniel stirred but didn't wake. "The sheriff will want to talk to you when you're up to it. Bandits have been hitting the stage coaches in these parts for months now." Sarah nodded, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her head. "Of course. I'll tell him whatever I can, though I'm afraid I didn't see much." "That can wait till morning. You need to rest now." Jackson stood carefully, cradling his sleeping son. "I've set up in the back room. You take the bed tonight." "I couldn't possibly, please," he interrupted. "It's no trouble. You've been through enough today." There was something in his voice, a note of understanding that went beyond simple kindness to a stranger that made Sarah relent. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Jackson nodded, then hesitated by the bedroom door. "Those men, the bandits, they took the strongbox. But was there anything of yours that was lost? Anything important?" Sarah thought of her single trunk, filled with the few possessions she had brought from Boston: clothes, books, a silver hand mirror that had belonged to her mother, and nearly all the money she had to her name. All gone now, consumed by fire or scattered across the mountainside. "Everything," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm alive, thanks to you. That's what matters." Jackson studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Get some sleep, Miss Vaughn. Things have a way of looking different in the morning." After he had gone, taking the sleeping child with him, Sarah lay awake staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. The events of the day played through her mind like scenes from a dime novel: the attack, the fire, the terrifying moment of flight, and then those strong arms catching her, saving her from certain death. "Stay forever," he had said. Such strange words to speak to a stranger. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, Sarah couldn't help wondering what it might be like if she did. Morning brought clarity and pain in equal measure. Sarah's body ached in places she didn't know could ache, and the cut above her eye had swollen overnight. But the dizziness had subsided, and with it came a clearer understanding of her predicament. She was essentially stranded in an unfamiliar town with no possessions and no money, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. The smell of coffee and the sound of a child's laughter drew her from the bedroom. Jackson stood at the stove, his back to her, while Daniel sat at a small table, giggling as he attempted to stack wooden blocks into a tower. "Good morning," Sarah said, smoothing down her rumpled dress as best she could. Jackson turned, a coffee pot in hand, and Daniel's head swiveled toward her, his blocks forgotten. "You're the lady who fell from the sky," the boy said with wide-eyed wonder. Despite everything, Sarah couldn't help but smile. "I suppose that's one way to look at it." "Daniel," Jackson said with gentle reproach, "this is Miss Vaughn, and she didn't fall from the sky, she jumped from the stagecoach because it was in trouble." "Like a bird," Daniel persisted. "Not exactly," Sarah answered, moving carefully to join them at the table. "Birds are much more graceful than I was." Jackson set a cup of coffee in front of her. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Sore," she admitted, "but better. Thank you for the bed." He nodded, turning back to the stove where a pan of eggs sizzled. "Sheriff Thompson will be by later. I rode into town at first light to let him know you were here and well enough to give a statement." Sarah took a sip of the coffee, strong and black. Nothing like the delicately sweetened brew she was accustomed to in Boston, but strangely satisfying nonetheless. "Mr. Zimmerman, Jackson," he corrected her, sliding a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her. "Jackson," she amended. "I can't impose on your hospitality much longer. Is there a hotel in Los Alamos where I might stay?" A shadow crossed his face. "There's Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, but—" He hesitated, setting his own plate down and taking a seat. "Miss Vaughn, I hope you won't take offense, but I couldn't help noticing you mentioned last night that everything you owned was on that stagecoach." Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm. It was one thing to acknowledge her desperate situation to herself, quite another to have it stated so plainly by someone else. "Yes, that's true. But I'm sure I can find work in town, and Papa says you should stay with us," Daniel interrupted, his small face earnest. "He told Mrs. Rodriguez that you needed a place, and we have a place, and you could teach me my letters 'cause Papa's not very good at it." "Daniel," Jackson's stern tone was undermined by the flush creeping up his neck. "That was a private conversation." Sarah looked between father and son, momentarily at a loss for words. The idea was preposterous, of course. She had known this man for less than a day. What would people think? What would they say? Yet as she considered her limited options, a small, rebellious part of her wondered why she should care what anyone thought. Wasn't that precisely what she had left Boston to escape the suffocating weight of society's expectations? "I couldn't possibly accept such an offer without contributing something in return," she finally said, choosing her words carefully. "As your son mentioned, I was a teacher in Boston. If you're in need of someone to tutor Daniel, perhaps we could come to an arrangement." Jackson studied her for a long moment, and Sarah found herself holding her breath under his scrutiny. His eyes were even more striking in the morning light, not just blue, but a clear, piercing blue that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed composure. "My wife, Emma, died 2 years ago," he said finally, his voice matter-of-fact but with an undercurrent of old pain. "Since then, I've managed the ranch and Daniel as best I could, but there are things a boy should learn that I have little time to teach. Reading, writing, figures Emma would have wanted him to know these things." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "I have a small cabin about 100 yards from the main house. It was built for the foreman, but he moved on last spring, and I haven't found a replacement yet. It's yours if you want it, in exchange for teaching Daniel and perhaps helping with some of the household accounts. I've never had a head for numbers." The offer was almost too perfect, stirring a flutter of suspicion in Sarah's chest. "That's very generous, but it's not charity," Jackson interrupted as if reading her thoughts. "I'd be getting the better end of the bargain. Daniel needs education and I need help. You need a place to stay and time to decide what comes next. It's a fair trade." Put that way, Sarah found it difficult to argue, and the alternative, throwing herself on the mercy of strangers in town, or worse, Having to write to her father in Boston for money to return home in disgrace was unthinkable. "All right," she agreed cautiously, "until I can get back on my feet." Daniel clapped his hands in delight, and even Jackson's usually serious expression softened into something that might have been satisfaction. "Stay forever," Daniel said, echoing his father's words from the day before, though the child couldn't have known their significance. "Please." This time, it was Sarah who flushed, unable to meet Jackson's eyes as she turned her attention to her breakfast. "We'll see," she murmured, though she knew that promising forever to anyone, even a sweet child with hopeful eyes, was something she wasn't prepared to do. The interview with Sheriff Thompson later that morning was brief, but uncomfortable. A gruff man with a salt and pepper mustache and shrewd eyes, he seemed more interested in Sarah's background and reasons for traveling than in her limited recollections of the bandits. "So you left Boston to seek employment as a teacher out west?" he asked, his tone making it clear he found this explanation lacking. "Yes," Sarah replied firmly, determined not to reveal the true complexity of her situation. "I had heard that qualified teachers were in high demand in the territories." The sheriff grunted noncommittally. "And now you'll be staying at the Zimmerman ranch as young Daniel's tutor, for the time being, yes." Sarah lifted her chin slightly. "Mr. Zimmerman has been kind enough to offer me accommodation in exchange for teaching his son." "Mighty convenient arrangement," Thompson remarked, giving Jackson a look that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. "Well, Miss Vaughn, if you remember anything else about the bandits, anything at all, you let me know. 4 stagecoaches in 3 months, and not a single solid lead." After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between Sarah and Jackson. She could tell there was something he wanted to say, some explanation he felt he owed her. "Sheriff Thompson is good at his job," Jackson finally offered, "but he's suspicious by nature. Don't take it personally." "It seemed rather personal," Sarah couldn't help commenting. Jackson sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Los Alamos is a small town, Miss Vaughn. People talk, and a single woman staying at a widower's ranch is bound to set tongues wagging." "I see." Sarah felt her newfound independence already being threatened by small-town gossip. "Perhaps I should reconsider." "No," Jackson said quickly, then moderated his tone. "That is, unless you want to, but I meant what I said. Daniel needs a teacher, and the foreman's cabin is sitting empty. What people in town choose to speculate about is their business, not ours." There was a defiance in his stance that Sarah found herself admiring. Here was a man who, like her, seemed determined to live on his own terms, society's expectations be damned. "You're right," she agreed, straightening her shoulders. "I didn't come all this way to let gossip dictate my choices." Something like approval flickered in Jackson's eyes. "Good. Now, if you're feeling up to it, I thought we might ride out to the cabin this afternoon, see what supplies you'll need to make it habitable." The foreman's cabin exceeded Sarah's expectations. Though small, just one main room with a curtained-off sleeping area, plus a lean-to kitchen, it was solidly built and situated on a gentle rise that afforded a view of both the main ranch house and the distant mountains. A small vegetable garden, now overgrown with weeds, occupied one side of the yard. "It needs work," Jackson acknowledged as he pushed open the door, which creaked in protest. "But the roof doesn't leak, and the stove draws well." Daniel had insisted on accompanying them and now darted inside ahead of the adults, his excitement palpable. "Can we clean it today?" "Can Miss Vaughn move in today?" Jackson chuckled, a sound that Sarah realized she'd heard rarely in their brief acquaintance. "Not today, son, but soon." As Sarah stepped inside, dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the single window, she felt an unexpected sense of possibility. This small, neglected space could be hers, a home of her own, earned through her own skills and efforts. It was more than she had dared hope for when she'd boarded that stagecoach in Denver. "It's perfect," she said softly, turning to face Jackson. "Thank you." He looked momentarily taken aback, as if her gratitude made him uncomfortable. "Don't thank me yet. There's plenty of hard work ahead to make it livable." But Sarah wasn't deterred. Hard work she could handle. It was uncertainty and dependency she had feared. "When can we start?" Over the next week, Sarah threw herself into the task of making the cabin habitable. Jackson had recruited 2 of his ranch hands to help with the heavier work, fixing the sagging porch step, replacing a cracked window pane, and hauling fresh straw for the mattress tick, but the cleaning and organizing fell primarily to Sarah. She welcomed the physical labor, finding that it helped clear her mind and exhaust her body enough that sleep came easily despite her unfamiliar surroundings. Daniel proved to be an enthusiastic, if not always helpful, assistant, trailing after Sarah with a child-sized broom and peppering her with questions about Boston, stagecoaches, and why the sky was blue. By the 3rd day, Sarah had begun incorporating impromptu lessons into their work, teaching him the alphabet as they scrubbed floors and basic arithmetic, as they counted jars of preserved foods that Jackson's housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, had contributed to Sarah's pantry. It was during one of these lessons, as Sarah and Daniel sat on the newly swept porch identifying shapes in the clouds, that Jackson approached from the main house. He had been a somewhat distant presence since their first day at the cabin, checking in periodically but largely leaving Sarah to her own devices. Now, as he drew closer, Sarah noticed he was carrying something bulky wrapped in brown paper. "Found these in the attic," he said without preamble, setting the package beside her on the porch step. "Thought they might be of use." Sarah unwrapped the paper to find several books, a primer, a mathematics textbook, a volume of American history, and a well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. "Emma's teaching materials," Jackson explained, his voice carefully neutral. "She taught at the schoolhouse in Los Alamos before Daniel was born." Sarah ran her fingers reverently over the book's spines. "These will be wonderful, thank you, but are you sure?" "She would have wanted them used," Jackson said firmly. Education was important to her. Daniel, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly piped up. "Mama liked stories with pirates," he informed Sarah solemnly. "Papa says I'm too little for pirates, but maybe when I'm bigger, you can read me pirate stories too." Sarah glanced at Jackson, unsure how to respond, but his expression had softened as he looked at his son. "Maybe Miss Vaughn will find some pirate stories that are suitable for brave 4-year-olds, he suggested, ruffling Daniel's hair. "I'm almost 5, the boy protested. "Not for 3 more months, Jackson corrected him with a smile. Then, to Sarah, "Speaking of which, Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned she'd be making a special dinner for Daniel's birthday in October. She hoped you'd join us." "October is months away," Sarah pointed out, surprised by the assumption that she would still be there. Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a realization that he had presumed too much. "Of course. I didn't mean to imply. That is, you're welcome to stay as long as the arrangement suits you." An awkward silence fell, broken only by Daniel's oblivious humming as he flipped through the primer, pointing excitedly at the illustrations. "Thank you for the books," Sarah finally said, gathering them into a neat stack. "We'll make good use of them, won't we, Daniel?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, and the moment of tension passed. But as Jackson took his leave, heading back to whatever ranch business required his attention, Sarah found herself watching his retreating figure with a mixture of confusion and a strange, unnamed feeling that she wasn't quite ready to examine. That evening, after Daniel had been tucked into bed in the main house and Sarah had returned to her cabin, she sat by the light of a single lamp and opened Emma Zimmerman's primer. A piece of paper fluttered out a letter, its ink faded but still legible. Sarah knew she should fold it up without reading, respect the privacy of the dead woman whose place she had, in some small way, temporarily filled. Instead, she found herself scanning the words. "My dearest Jackson, Daniel took his first steps today while you were checking the north pasture. 3 wobbly steps from the sofa to my waiting arms, then a tumble and peals of laughter instead of tears. He has your determination, my love. The doctor visited again yesterday. I didn't want to worry you with details in my last letter, but I think we must face what's coming. The cough is worse, and there was blood again this morning. Dr. Miller says I should consider going to Denver, to the specialist there, but we both know what that would mean: months away from you and Daniel, months of expensive treatments that might buy me time but nothing more. I would rather have 1 good year here, with you both, than 5 painful years elsewhere. Please try to understand this isn't giving up. It's choosing how to spend whatever time remains. All my love, Emma." Sarah carefully refolded the letter with trembling hands, a wave of guilt washing over her for having intruded on such a private moment. So Emma had been ill consumption, it sounded like. And she had chosen to spend her remaining time with her family, rather than seeking treatment that might have extended her life. The revelation cast Jackson's gruff manner and occasional melancholy in a new light. No wonder he sometimes looked at Daniel with a mixture of love and sorrow. The boy was growing up, without knowing the mother who had loved him enough to sacrifice potential years of her life for quality time with him. Sarah slipped the letter back into the primer, promising herself she would return it to Jackson at the first opportunity, with an apology for having read it. But as she prepared for bed in her small but now clean cabin, she found herself wondering what kind of woman Emma Zimmerman had been, beyond the glimpse provided by that one letter, and what kind of man Jackson had been before grief had etched lines into his weathered face. These thoughts followed her into dreams that featured burning stagecoaches, falling through air, and strong arms catching her. But in the dreams, the words that followed were not "stay forever," but she would have wanted them used. By the end of Sarah's second week at the Zimmerman ranch, a routine had established itself. Mornings were devoted to Daniel's lessons, conducted either on the porch of the cabin or, if the weather was inclement, at the kitchen table in the main house. Afternoons saw Sarah helping Mrs. Rodriguez with household tasks or tending to her newly reclaimed vegetable garden, while Daniel either napped or accompanied his father on simple ranch chores. Jackson remained something of an enigma. During meals, which they often shared, he was polite but reserved, answering Sarah's questions about the ranch or the local area, but rarely volunteering information about himself. Only with Daniel did he truly relax, his face transforming when he played with his son, or listened to the boy's excited recounting of what he had learned that day. Despite his reserve, Sarah found herself increasingly aware of Jackson's presence: the sound of his boots on the porch steps, the deep timbre of his voice as he called instructions to his ranch hands, the surprisingly gentle way his calloused fingers corrected Daniel's grip on a pencil when the boy struggled with his letters. She told herself it was natural to be attentive to her employer, especially one who had saved her life. But there were moments when their eyes met across the dinner table that suggested something more complicated was at play. It was during one such dinner, as July gave way to August and the New Mexico heat settled over the land like a wool blanket, that their tentative peace was disrupted. Sheriff Thompson caught one of the Stagecoach bandits, Jackson announced as he passed the bread basket to Sarah. Arrested him in Taos yesterday. Sarah nearly dropped the basket. How did they identify him? A distinctive scar on his hand, apparently. The Wells Fargo agent from the first robbery remembered it. Jackson studied her reaction carefully. Sheriff's bringing him to Los Alamos tomorrow. Wants you to take a look, see if you recognize him. The piece of bread Sarah had been buttering suddenly seemed unappetizing. I told the sheriff I didn't get a good look at them. They wore bandanas over their faces. Sometimes we notice things without realizing it, Jackson said gently. And even if you can't identify him, your presence at the jail might rattle him enough to confess. Sarah set down her knife with a shaky hand. I'll go, of course, but I doubt I'll be of much help. You don't have to go alone, Jackson offered, his voice dropping to ensure Daniel, who was busily constructing a mountain range out of his mashed potatoes, wouldn't overhear. I could accompany you. The offer surprised her. In the 2 weeks she'd been at the ranch, Jackson had rarely left his work to venture into town. Don't you have fence repairs scheduled for tomorrow? Hank and Miguel can handle it. Jackson's expression was unreadable in the lamplight. Unless you'd prefer to go alone. No, Sarah admitted, finding that she was genuinely relieved at the prospect of having Jackson beside her. Thank you. I'd appreciate the company. The ride to Los Alamos the next morning was largely silent, but not uncomfortably so. Sarah found that one of the things she appreciated about Jackson was his lack of need to fill silence with empty conversation. They had left Daniel in Mrs. Rodriguez's capable hands, the boy extracting a promise from Sarah that they would continue their study of frogs and toads upon her return. The town of Los Alamos was modest but growing, with a main street that featured the essential businesses of frontier life: a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small hotel, and at the far end, the sheriff's office and jail. As they hitched their horses outside the latter, Sarah was acutely aware of curious glances from townsfolk going about their business. Ignore them, Jackson murmured as he helped her down from her mount. Small towns run on gossip, but it dies down eventually. Inside, Sheriff Thompson greeted them with his customary gruff manner, though Sarah thought she detected a hint of surprise at Jackson's presence. Zimmerman, didn't expect to see you. Thought Miss Vaughn might come with Mrs. Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez had her hands full with Daniel, Jackson replied evenly. I offered to escort Miss Vaughn instead. The sheriff grunted noncommittally, then turned to Sarah. The prisoner's in the back cell. Name's Pete Rollins. Claims he wasn't anywhere near the Stagecoach routes these past months, but he was carrying a gold watch that matches the description of one stolen from a passenger in the May robbery. Sarah nodded, steeling herself. What do you need me to do? Just look at him. See if anything strikes you as familiar. The sheriff led them through a door into a small corridor with 3 cells. Only one was occupied by a thin man with a week's growth of beard and restless eyes that immediately fixed on Sarah. Who's the lady, Sheriff? He called out, moving to the bars. Don't tell me you're arresting pretty young things for walking down the street now. Shut your mouth, Rollins, Thompson snapped. This here's a witness. She was on the stagecoach you and your friends shot up last month. Rollins's expression changed, a flicker of something fear, recognition, crossing his face before it settled into a mask of indifference. Don't know what you're talking about. I was in Santa Fe last month. Ask anyone at the Golden Spur Saloon. Sarah studied the man carefully. There was something familiar about his voice, the nasal quality of it, but she couldn't be certain. She had been so focused on the burning coach, on survival, that details of the attackers had barely registered. Well, the sheriff prompted after a moment. Recognize him. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head slowly. I can't say for certain. Their faces were covered and it all happened so quickly. Rawlins's posture relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You're the one who jumped, he said suddenly, a slow smile spreading across his face. The pretty one in the blue dress. Thought for sure you'd break your neck on those rocks. A cold weight settled in Sarah's stomach. He had been there, had seen her jump. The only way he could know about her blue dress was if he had been one of the attackers. Beside her, she felt Jackson tense, his hand moving instinctively to her elbow as if to steady her. Looks like you just confessed, Rawlins, Sheriff Thompson said with grim satisfaction. Might want to reconsider that Santa Fe story now. Rawlins's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure malice as he glared at Sarah. Shouldn't have come here, lady. My friends won't be happy about this, and they know where that rancher's place is, don't they? Out past the old Miller Creek crossing. That's enough. Jackson stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. You threatening a woman and a child, Rawlins? Just making conversation, the prisoner replied with mock innocence. Telling the lady she ought to be careful is all. Never know what might happen out there in the wilderness. Sheriff Thompson moved between them, his hand on his gun. That's enough out of you, Rawlins. Zimmerman, take Miss Vaughn out front. I need to have a word with my prisoner about the consequences of threatening witnesses. Jackson didn't need to be told twice. His hand firmly on Sarah's back, he guided her back through the door, which Thompson closed firmly behind them. Even through the thick wood, they could hear the sheriff's raised voice, though the words were indistinct. Are you all right? Jackson asked once they were alone in the sheriff's office. His face was tight with concern, and Sarah realized his hand was still on her back, a warm, steadying presence. Yes, she said, though her voice betrayed her with a slight tremor. It was just unsettling to know he saw me that day. That he watched and did nothing while people could have died. Jackson's expression darkened. Men like that don't see others as people, just obstacles or opportunities. He hesitated, then added more gently, what he said about the ranch, it was just talk, trying to scare you. The sheriff will get the names of his accomplices, and they'll be behind bars soon enough. Sarah wasn't so certain, but she appreciated his attempt to reassure her. I hope you're right. The door opened, and Sheriff Thompson rejoined them, his face grim. Rawlins isn't talking, but we'll keep working on him. Miss Vaughn, I appreciate you coming in. Your confirmation that he was at the scene helps build our case. Will you need her to testify at a trial? Jackson asked, his tone suggesting he wasn't enthusiastic about the prospect. Possibly. But that's weeks away yet. The sheriff glanced between them, a speculative look in his eyes. Zimmerman might be wise to keep an extra man on watch at the ranch for a while, just as a precaution. Jackson nodded, his jaw set, already planning on it. As they left the jail and mounted their horses for the ride back to the ranch, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had inadvertently put both Jackson and Daniel in danger. The thought of anything happening to either of them, because of her, made her physically ill. Jackson, she began hesitantly as they rode side by side down the dusty Main Street, perhaps it would be better if I found lodging in town, just until they catch the other bandits. He looked at her sharply. Absolutely not. But what Rawlins said was meant to frighten you, nothing more. Jackson's voice brooked no argument. The ranch is the safest place for you. We have men patrolling the property day and night, and no stranger approaches the house without being seen from half a mile away. When Sarah still looked unconvinced, he added more softly, besides, Daniel would be heartbroken if his teacher suddenly disappeared. The boys had enough loss in his life. It was a low blow, appealing to her affection for Daniel, and from the flicker in Jackson's eyes he knew it. but it was also effective. The thought of leaving the bright-eyed child who had so quickly wormed his way into her heart was more painful than Sarah wanted to admit. "All right," she conceded, "but promise me you'll be careful, both of you." Jackson's expression softened slightly, the tension around his eyes easing. "I promise. Now let's get back before Daniel convinces Mrs. Rodriguez that frogs belong in the kitchen." Despite the gravity of their situation, Sarah found herself smiling at the image. And as they rode back toward the ranch, side by side under the vast New Mexico sky, she realized that somewhere along the way, the Zimmerman ranch had begun to feel like home. The next 2 weeks passed without incident, but the shadow of Rawlins's threat hung over the ranch like a storm cloud on the horizon. True to his word, Jackson increased security, ensuring that at least 2 armed men were on patrol at all times. He also insisted on personally escorting Sarah to and from her cabin each evening, a practice she initially protested as unnecessary, but secretly came to appreciate for reasons that had less to do with safety and more to do with the quiet conversations they shared during those brief walks. It was during one such walk, as August's heat began to give way to September's cooler evenings, that Jackson finally spoke of Emma. "Daniel has her eyes," he said abruptly, after they had been walking in companionable silence for several minutes. "And her laugh. Sometimes when he finds something particularly funny, I have to turn away because the sound is so like hers." Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the sudden confidence but careful not to show it. "He has a wonderful laugh, full of joy." Jackson nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Emma was like that too, found joy in small things, the first wildflowers of spring, a particularly bright sunset, Daniel's first word. He paused, then added quietly, "She made this place feel like more than just land and cattle, made it feel like home." Sarah felt a pang of something that might have been envy or perhaps just sadness for what Jackson and Daniel had lost. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Jackson was silent for a moment, then continued with what seemed to be an effort. "I found the letter. The one that fell from her primer. Mrs. Rodriguez told me you'd asked her to return it to me, but that you'd seemed affected by it." Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry for reading it. It fell out when I opened the book and I should have put it away immediately, but—" "It's all right," Jackson assured her. "In a way, I'm glad you did. Saves me trying to explain certain things." They had reached the cabin now, but neither made a move to end the conversation. Instead, Jackson leaned against the porch railing, his face half in shadow as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Emma knew she was dying for nearly a year before she did," he said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of old pain. "She made me promise 2 things. That I would keep the ranch, which had been her father's, and that I would make sure Daniel knew he was loved every day of his life." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "You've kept those promises beautifully. Daniel is the most secure, happy child I've ever known." Jackson's eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "It hasn't always been easy. There were days, especially in the beginning, when grief made me short-tempered, distant. Days when I looked at Daniel and saw only what Emma was missing, what she would never see his first day of school, his first hunt, the man he'll become." "But you pushed through it," Sarah said softly. "For him, for both of us," Jackson corrected her. "A person can't live half alive, Sarah. Emma taught me that. She chose quality of life over quantity, and in doing so, taught me that each day has to matter." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that Emma would be proud of the father you've become, and of the home you've maintained for Daniel. Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, gratitude, perhaps, or relief at being understood. He straightened, pushing away from the railing. "It's getting dark. You should get inside." The abrupt change of subject was so typically Jackson that Sarah might have smiled if the moment hadn't felt so weighted with unspoken things. "Yes, of course. Thank you for walking me back." He nodded, already turning to go, but then hesitated. "Sarah." "Yes. I'm glad you're here. Not just for Daniel's sake." Before she could respond, he was striding away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. Sarah stood on her porch for a long time after he'd gone, replaying his words and wondering at the strange warmth they had kindled in her chest. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the first real hint of autumn in the air. Sarah was up early, eager to take advantage of the cooler weather to harvest some of the late vegetables from her garden. She had just filled a basket with tomatoes and was contemplating whether the squash were ready when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Sheriff Thompson riding toward her cabin, his expression grim. She set down her basket and walked to meet him, a sense of foreboding growing with each step. "Sheriff," she greeted him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong?" Thompson dismounted with a grunt, leading his horse the last few paces. "Afraid so, Miss Vaughn. Rawlins escaped last night, overpowered my deputy during the night check, took his gun and keys." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Has he been recaptured?" "Not yet. We've got men searching, but he had several hours head start." The sheriff's eyes scanned the surrounding landscape, taking in the exposed position of Sarah's cabin. "I came to warn you and Zimmerman. Given what Rawlins said during your visit, it seemed prudent." "Of course," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Jackson, Mr. Zimmerman is likely at the corral. The men were planning to move some cattle today." Thompson nodded. "I'll head that way. In the meantime, Miss Vaughn, I'd suggest you not stay out here alone. At least until we've got Rawlins back behind bars." After the sheriff departed, Sarah abandoned her gardening and hurried toward the main house, her mind racing. Would Rawlins really come after her? It seemed unlikely that a man on the run would risk recapture for the sake of revenge, but the memory of his malevolent stare made her shudder. Mrs. Rodriguez was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced movements, while Daniel sat at the table carefully copying his alphabet onto a slate. Both looked up when Sarah entered, the housekeeper's experienced eye immediately noting her distress. "What is it, Miss Vaughn? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Daniel, unsure how much to say in front of the child. Mrs. Rodriguez, understanding without words, wiped her hands on her apron and spoke to the boy in a gentle but firm tone. "Daniel, why don't you take your slate outside and show your papa how well you're doing with your letters? I believe he's at the corral with the men." Daniel needed no further encouragement, eagerly sliding off his chair and gathering his slate and chalk. "Will you come too, Miss Sarah? Papa says I'm getting really good at my K-Tekes and L-Tekes." "In a little while," Sarah promised, forcing a smile. "Mrs. Rodriguez and I need to discuss some household matters first." Once Daniel had gone, Sarah quickly explained the situation to the housekeeper, whose lined face grew increasingly grave as she listened. "Dios mío," Mrs. Rodriguez murmured when Sarah had finished. "That man, that Rawlins, he would threaten a woman, a child. Some men have no souls." "Sheriff Thompson doesn't seem to think he'll actually come here," Sarah assured her, trying to convince herself as much as the older woman. "It's just a precaution." Mrs. Rodriguez snorted, her hands automatically returning to the bread dough. "Men, they always think with their guns, not their heads. This Rawlins, he has lost everything now. Such a man is dangerous, like a wounded animal." The housekeeper's words echoed uneasily in Sarah's mind throughout the day. Jackson, when he returned from the corral with Daniel in tow, was grim-faced but reassuring. Additional men would be assigned to patrol the property, he promised, and under no circumstances was Sarah to return to her cabin until Rawlins was recaptured. "You'll stay in the guest room," he informed her in a tone that brooked no argument. "It's the most secure location, with only one window and that facing the courtyard where the men gather in the evening." Sarah knew she should be grateful for his concern, but a part of her bristled at being so completely managed. "And if Rawlins isn't caught for weeks, months, am I to be a prisoner here?" Jackson's expression softened slightly at her frustration. "Not a prisoner, a protected guest." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Sarah challenged, though she kept her voice low so as not to alarm Daniel, who was showing Mrs. Rodriguez his slate in the kitchen. "Because from where I stand it feels like my choices are being taken away. Again." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a new awareness. "Again." Sarah immediately regretted her words. She had never spoken to anyone about her reasons for leaving Boston, not even Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become something of a confidante. "It doesn't matter. Ancient history." Jackson studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep you safe. There's a man out there who explicitly threatened you, who knows where you live, and who has already proven he's capable of violence. Would you really rather risk your life than accept help?" Put that way, her resistance did seem foolish, and yet the thought of surrendering the independence she had so recently gained, even temporarily, felt like a defeat. "No," she admitted reluctantly. "But I want it understood that this is a temporary arrangement. As soon as Rawlins is caught, I return to my cabin." "Agreed," Jackson said, a hint of relief in his voice. "And in the meantime, you're welcome to come and go as you please during daylight hours, with one of the men as escort if you leave the immediate vicinity of the house." It was a reasonable compromise, and Sarah nodded her acceptance. But as she went to gather some essentials from her cabin, accompanied by one of the ranch hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between her and Jackson, a test of wills that had ended in détente, rather than victory for either side. That evening, after Daniel had been put to bed, and Mrs. Rodriguez had retired to her quarters adjacent to the kitchen, Sarah found herself alone with Jackson in the main room of the house. A fire crackled in the hearth, holding the autumn chill at bay, and a single lamp cast a warm glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. Jackson had been quiet throughout dinner, responding to Daniel's chatter but offering little of his own, and that same silence extended into the evening. He sat in his accustomed chair by the fire, ostensibly reading a newspaper that had arrived with the weekly mail delivery. But Sarah noticed that he had been on the same page for the better part of an hour. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," she finally ventured, setting aside the mending she had been working on, "about my choices being taken away again." Jackson looked up, his expression guarded. "You said it was ancient history. It is, in a way." Sarah smoothed her skirt, gathering her thoughts. "But perhaps you deserve to know, given that my presence here has now put you and Daniel at risk." He folded the newspaper and set it aside, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening if you want to tell me, but don't feel obligated." Sarah took a deep breath, then plunged ahead. "I left Boston because I was being pressured to marry a man I did not love, a man chosen by my father for his business connections rather than any compatibility between us." Jackson's expression remained neutral, but she saw a muscle tighten in his jaw. "Your father tried to force you, not physically," Sarah clarified, "but he made it clear that if I refused, I would be cut off not just financially, but from the family entirely. My mother died when I was 16 and my father. He was always stern, but after her death, he he became inflexible. Marriages were alliances to him, nothing more. And the man, this suitor, Sarah's hands twisted in her lap, Theodore Blackburn, 15 years my senior, widowed with a reputation for coldness in business and other matters. She swallowed hard, the memories still bitter. I tried to reason with my father. I wasn't opposed to marriage itself, just to being treated as a commodity, bartered for business advantages. But he wouldn't listen. "So you ran," Jackson said, not a question but an understanding. "I prefer to think of it as choosing my own path," Sarah corrected him with a small, defiant smile. "I had some money of my own, left to me by my grandmother. Not much, but enough to get me as far as Denver. I had planned to find work there as a teacher, but there were no positions available. Someone at the boarding house mentioned that Los Alamos was desperate for educated people, so you boarded that stagecoach," Jackson finished for her, "and ended up flying through the air into my arms." The way he said it, with a hint of wonder in his voice, made Sarah's heart beat a little faster. "Yes. So you see, when you insist on making decisions about my safety, about where I can go and when, it brings back memories I'd rather forget." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "My father was like yours in some ways, believed a man should make decisions without consulting anyone, least of all women. He ruled our ranch in Colorado with an iron fist until the day he died." This was new information. Jackson rarely spoke of his life before Los Alamos. Sarah leaned forward slightly, encouraging him to continue. "When I met Emma, I was determined to be different, to listen, to compromise." A shadow crossed his face. "And for the most part, I think I was. But then she got sick, and suddenly I found myself making all the decisions again, which doctors to see, which treatments to try, how much to tell Daniel. I told myself it was to spare her, to take the burden from her shoulders, but looking back." He trailed off, his gaze fixed on the fire. "You think you were controlling like your father," Sarah guessed. Jackson nodded slowly. "Sometimes." "Emma never said so, but there were moments when I'd see a look in her eyes, frustration or resignation. It wasn't until I found that letter after she died that I realized she had made her own choice all along, to stay here, to live what life she had left on her own terms." "And you respected that choice," Sarah pointed out gently, "even though it meant losing her sooner." "Because I loved her," Jackson said simply. "And loving someone means recognizing their right to make their own decisions, even when those decisions break your heart." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah found herself unable to look away from Jackson's face, from the raw honesty in his expression. "I'm not trying to take your independence, Sarah," he continued softly. "God knows I admire your courage in leaving everything you knew and making your own way. But I can't bear the thought of anything happening to you, not when I could prevent it." There was something in his voice, in his eyes, that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "Because of Daniel?" she asked, her own voice barely above a whisper. "Because he's grown attached to me." Jackson held her gaze steadily. "Not just Daniel." Before Sarah could respond, a noise from outside drew their attention, the sound of horses approaching at speed. Jackson was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window with a fluid grace that reminded Sarah he had once been a soldier. "It's Thompson," he reported, relief evident in his voice. "And it looks like he has someone with him. Stay here." Sarah remained by the fire as Jackson went to the door, her mind still reeling from the conversation that had been interrupted. Not just Daniel. The implication was clear, yet so unexpected that she hardly dared examine it too closely. From her seat, she could hear men's voices, Jackson's, the sheriff's, and a third she didn't recognize. Their words were indistinct, but the tone was urgent. After several minutes, the door closed and Jackson returned to the main room alone, his expression both relieved and troubled. "They've caught Rawlins," he announced without preamble. "Found him half dead from a snake bite about 10 miles south of here, trying to cross into Mexico." "Thank God," Sarah breathed, a weight lifting from her shoulders. Will he live?" "Thompson thinks so, unfortunately. They've got him under guard at Doc Miller's for now." Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "But that's not all. Thompson brought one of Rawlins's gang with him, a young fellow named Jenkins who turned himself in, looking for leniency. And it seems Rawlins was indeed planning to come here, tonight, he and 2 others. Jackson's voice was grim. "Jenkins claims he wanted no part of hurting a woman, which is why he came to Thompson. The other 2 are still out there, possibly nearby." The relief Sarah had felt moments ago evaporated. "So the danger isn't over." "Not entirely," Jackson admitted. "But Thompson has men searching, and with Jenkins's information, they know who they're looking for now. It's only a matter of time." Sarah nodded, trying to process this new information. "I suppose I'm still staying in the guest room then. For tonight, at least." Jackson hesitated, then added more softly, "I'm sorry about before for being dictatorial." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling at his choice of word. "Dictatorial. Is that how you see yourself?" A hint of answering warmth appeared in Jackson's eyes. "It's how Emma described me once, when I insisted she stay in bed for a week after a bad cough. She had some choice words for me by day 3. "I imagine she did," Sarah said, trying to picture the woman who had preceded her in this house in Jackson's life. "She sounds like she was spirited." "She was," Jackson agreed, a fondness in his voice that held no pain now, only warm memory. "You would have liked her, I think. And she would have approved of you." The simple statement touched Sarah more deeply than she had expected. "I hope so," she said quietly. "I've come to care very much for the home she created and for the people in it." Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, Sarah knew with certainty that whatever had been building between them these past weeks, this fragile, tentative connection was real and terrifying and wonderful. The sound of little feet on the stairs broke the moment. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep and his eyes heavy-lidded. "Papa," he called, his voice small and confused. "I heard horses." Jackson crossed to his son in 3 long strides, scooping the boy up into his arms. "Just the sheriff, buddy. Nothing to worry about." "Did we wake you?" Daniel nodded, resting his head against his father's shoulder. "Is Miss Sarah staying with us tonight?" he asked, spotting her by the fire. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her heart melting at the sleepy child's obvious pleasure at the arrangement. "Just for a little while." "Good," Daniel mumbled, already drifting back to sleep in his father's secure embrace. "You should stay forever. Like Papa said." Over the child's head, Jackson's eyes found Sarah's, a question in them that she wasn't yet ready to answer. But as she followed father and son up the stairs, she found herself wondering if Daniel's innocent words might someday come true. The next morning brought news that one of Rawlins's accomplices had been captured trying to steal a horse from a neighboring ranch. The 3rd man remained at large, but Sheriff Thompson was confident he had fled the area, deterred by the fate of his companions. Still, the sheriff cautioned when he stopped by the ranch to update them, "I'd keep a watchful eye for a few more days, just to be safe." Sarah accepted this advice with more equanimity than she might have before. The events of the past days and her conversation with Jackson the previous evening had given her a new perspective on his protective instincts. They weren't born of a desire to control, but of genuine concern, perhaps even affection. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had come west to escape one man's plans for her life. Was she now willingly walking into another's? And yet, there was a world of difference between Theodore Blackburn's cold calculations and Jackson Zimmerman's warm regard. One had seen her as a means to an end, the other saw her as what? A friend, a potential partner, someone worth protecting for her own sake. These questions occupied her mind as she went about her day, helping Mrs. Rodriguez with household tasks and conducting Daniel's lessons in the ranch house kitchen. Jackson was busy with the ranch hands, moving cattle to lower pastures in preparation for winter, but she caught glimpses of him throughout the day, a tall figure on horseback against the horizon, a shadow passing the kitchen window, a deep voice calling instructions to the men. It was late afternoon when Daniel, struggling with a simple addition problem, threw down his pencil in frustration. "I hate numbers. They're stupid." "Daniel Zimmerman," Sarah chided gently, "numbers are not stupid and neither are you. You're just tired. Why don't we take a break and go outside for a bit? Some fresh air might help." The boy brightened immediately at the suggestion. "Can we go see the new calves? Papa said they're in the small pasture." Sarah hesitated. The small pasture was within sight of the house but still some distance away. "Let me check with Mrs. Rodriguez first." The housekeeper, kneading dough for the evening's biscuits, gave her blessing but with a caveat. "Take Miguel with you. He's chopping wood by the barn and be back before sunset." With Miguel, one of the younger ranch hands, trailing at a discreet distance, Sarah and Daniel made their way to the small pasture where a dozen cows and their newborn calves grazed peacefully. Daniel's excitement at showing her his favorite calf, a spotted runt that Jackson had apparently promised he could help raise, was infectious, and Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the impromptu excursion. They were so absorbed in watching the calf's wobbling attempts to stand that neither noticed the approaching rider until he was nearly upon them. Miguel, who had been keeping watch from the fence line, gave a shout of warning just as a dusty, hard-faced man reined in his horse a few yards away. "Afternoon, madam," the stranger said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Fine day for a walk." Something about his smile, cold, calculating, set alarm bells ringing in Sarah's mind. She pulled Daniel closer to her side, one hand protectively on his shoulder. "It is. My son and I were just heading back to the house." The lie came easily, a desperate attempt to create some connection between herself and Daniel that might give the stranger pause. But from the way his eyes narrowed, she knew he wasn't fooled. "Your son, is it? Funny. I heard Zimmerman's boy had dark hair, like his pa. This little fella looks nothing like you." The man's hand moved to rest on his gun belt. "And you, madam, match the description of a certain stagecoach passenger that my friend Pete was mighty interested in finding." Miguel had drawn his own weapon now, but he was young and clearly nervous, his hand visibly trembling. "Miss Vaughn, take the boy and run," he called in Spanish, likely assuming the stranger wouldn't understand. "I will hold him here." But the man laughed, responding in fluent if accented Spanish. "I spent 5 years working cattle in Mexico, boy. Try again." Sarah's mind raced. The house was too far for her and Daniel to reach safely, but the barn was closer, and beyond it, the main corral where Jackson and the other men had been working. If they could just get past this man. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady for Daniel's sake. The boy was pressed against her side now, sensing the danger even if he didn't fully understand it. "Originally, just to scare you a bit on Pete's behalf." The man shrugged. "But now that I'm here, I'm thinking you might be worth something to Zimmerman. Rich rancher like him would probably pay a pretty penny to get his boy's teacher back safe and sound. So he was planning to kidnap her." The realization sent ice through Sarah's veins, but also sparked a fierce determination. She would not become a pawn in this man's game, not after everything she had done to take control of her own life. "You've made a mistake," she said, her voice stronger now. "Mr. Zimmerman is not rich and I'm just a hired teacher, nothing more." The man's eyes flicked from her to Daniel, then to Miguel, clearly calculating his odds. "We'll let him decide what you're worth. Now, you and the boy are coming with me, nice and quiet-like. Tell your Mexican friend to drop his gun or the kid gets hurt first." It was at that moment that a shot rang out, startling birds from a nearby tree. The stranger's hat flew off his head, a neat hole puncturing its crown. He froze, his hand halfway to his gun. "Touch either of them," came Jackson's voice from somewhere to Sarah's left, "and the next bullet goes through your skull instead of your hat." Sarah turned to see Jackson emerging from the tree line, rifle raised and expression deadly serious. Behind him were two more ranch hands, similarly armed. The stranger raised his hands slowly. Now, Zimmerman, no need for bloodshed, was just having a friendly conversation with the lady here. "That's so." Jackson's voice was dangerously soft as he advanced, his rifle never wavering. "Because from where I was standing, it looked a lot like you were threatening a woman and a child on my land." One of the ranch hands had circled around to relieve the man of his weapons, while Jackson kept him covered. Sarah took the opportunity to pull Daniel toward Jackson, the boy breaking free of her grip to run to his father as soon as they were close enough. "Papa, the bad man said he was going to take Miss Sarah away." Daniel's voice was high with fear and indignation. Jackson shifted his rifle to one hand, the other coming to rest reassuringly on his son's head, but his eyes never left the stranger. "Is that right?" The question was directed at Sarah, who had reached them now, her heart still racing. "Yes," she confirmed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He mentioned Rollins. Said he was here to scare me, but then decided I might be valuable to you." Something dangerous flashed in Jackson's eyes. For a brief moment, Sarah glimpsed the soldier he must have been hard, focused, capable of violence when necessary. Then Daniel pressed closer to his side, and the moment passed, replaced by controlled anger. "Hank," Jackson addressed one of the ranch hands, "ride into town and fetch Sheriff Thompson. Tell him we've got the third man from Rollins's gang." To the other, "Joe, get Miss Vaughn and Daniel back to the house. Miguel, you help me keep an eye on our guest until the sheriff arrives." Sarah wanted to protest to stay, to see this through, but the look in Jackson's eyes brooked no argument. And the truth was, Daniel needed to be away from this scene, from the tension and potential violence that still hung in the air. "Come on, sweetheart," she said to the boy, holding out her hand. "Let's go see if Mrs. Rodriguez has any cookies ready." Daniel looked up at his father, clearly reluctant to leave him. "You'll come soon, Papa, as soon as the sheriff gets here," Jackson promised, his expression softening as he looked at his son. "I need you to be brave and take care of Miss Sarah for me, all right?" This assignment of responsibility had the desired effect. Daniel straightened, his small shoulders squaring. "I will, Papa." As Sarah led Daniel away, following Joe back toward the house, she glanced over her shoulder once. Jackson stood tall against the setting sun, rifle still trained on the captured bandit, his stance protective and unwavering. In that moment, she realized something that perhaps she had known for weeks, but had been afraid to acknowledge. She was falling in love with Jackson Zimmerman. Not because he had saved her first from the burning Stagecoach, and now from this new threat, but because of the kind of man he was. A man who kept his promises, who put others before himself, who found ways to be strong without being harsh. A man unlike any she had known before. The realization should have frightened her. After all, hadn't she come west specifically to avoid being tied to a man, to find independence and self-sufficiency? Yet as she walked back to the ranch house, Daniel's small hand trustingly in hers, Sarah found that the thought of loving Jackson didn't feel like a constraint at all. It felt, strangely, like another kind of freedom. Sheriff Thompson arrived within the hour, accompanied by 2 deputies, and a grim satisfaction at having captured the last of Rawlins's gang. The man who gave his name as Silas Dowd was taken into custody with little ceremony, his threats and bravado fading in the face of Thompson's no-nonsense approach. "You'll be joining your friends in the territorial prison," the sheriff informed him as he was being led away. "Might want to consider how you'll spend the next 10 to 20 years. After the law enforcement contingent had departed, a heavy silence fell over the ranch house. Mrs. Rodriguez had taken Daniel to the kitchen, distracting him with cookie dough and stories while the adults processed the day's events. Sarah sat at the dining table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold before her, while Jackson paced the length of the room. "You should have stayed closer to the house," he said finally, his voice tight with barely suppressed emotion. "If I hadn't decided to check the south pasture when I did—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, not wanting to hear the rest of that thought. "It was foolish of me to go so far, even with Miguel as escort. I was just trying to give Daniel a break from his lessons. He was frustrated and—" "It's not your fault," Jackson cut in, stopping his pacing to look at her directly. "None of this is your fault, Sarah. I didn't mean to imply that it was, I just—" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of deep agitation. "When I saw Dowd there, so close to you and Daniel, I thought my heart would stop." The raw honesty in his voice caught Sarah off guard. "We're safe now," she said softly. "Thanks to you." Jackson shook his head, resuming his pacing. "It was too close. If anything had happened to either of you," he broke off, and Sarah saw that his hands were shaking slightly. This man who had faced down an armed bandit without flinching, who had run a ranch single-handedly while raising a son, was undone by the mere thought of what might have been. Without stopping to consider the propriety of her actions, Sarah rose and crossed to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "But nothing did happen. We're all safe, Jackson. It's over." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then into her eyes, his own dark with emotions too complex to name. "Is it over, I mean?" There was a weight to his question that went beyond the immediate danger, beyond Rawlins and his gang. Sarah felt it settle between them, heavy with possibility. "The threat is," she replied carefully, "but as for the rest—" Jackson covered her hand with his own, his touch warm and surprisingly gentle for a man who worked with cattle and horses. "When I saw you standing there with Daniel beside you, facing down Dowd with more courage than most men I've known." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I realized something I think I've known for weeks, since the moment you fell into my arms from that burning stagecoach." Sarah's heart began to race, not with fear this time, but with a wild, unexpected hope. "What did you realize?" "That I don't want you to leave. Not tomorrow, not next month, not ever." Jackson's voice was low, intense. "I know it's too soon. I know you came west to find independence, not another man to answer to. And I would never ask you to give up the freedom you fought so hard to gain, but I can't let you go without telling you what's in my heart." Sarah found it suddenly difficult to breathe. "And what is in your heart, Jackson Zimmerman?" His eyes never left hers as he answered, simple and direct as always. "Love, Sarah. For you, a love I never thought I'd feel again after Emma died." The words hung in the air between them, both a declaration and a question. Sarah was acutely aware of their position, standing close in the main room of his house, her hand still on his arm, his covering it. What would Mrs. Rodriguez think if she came in? What would people in town say? And then she realized she didn't care. Not anymore. "I left Boston to escape a loveless match," she said slowly, watching his face. "To find a place where I could be valued for who I am, not what I represent or what connections I bring. I never expected to find someone like you. Someone who sees me, truly sees me, and values what he sees." Hope kindled in Jackson's eyes. "Does that mean—" "It means," Sarah continued, a smile beginning to form, "that I've fallen in love with you too, Jackson Zimmerman, with your strength and your gentleness, with the way you love your son and honor your wife's memory, with the life you've built here." She gestured around them at the simple but welcoming home. "A life I could see myself sharing if you're sure that's what you want." Jackson's hand tightened on hers. "I've never been more sure of anything, but I need you to be certain too. This life ranching in the New Mexico territory, it's not easy. There are hard winters and dry summers, cattle rustlers and flash floods. It's nothing like Boston." "Thank God for that," Sarah said with feeling, earning a surprised laugh from Jackson. Boston was all appearances and social constraints. This, she squeezed his arm gently, is real. You are real. And what I feel for you is the most real thing I've ever known. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their declarations settling around them like a comfortable blanket. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Jackson leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and firm, like the man himself. When they parted, Sarah found herself breathless in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with joy. "Well," she managed after a moment, "that certainly makes things clear." Jackson chuckled, the sound warming her from within. "I've never been one for ambiguity. But Sarah, I want you to know I'm not asking you to give up teaching or your independence or anything else that matters to you. I'm just asking for a chance to build something together, something that honors who we both are." The thoughtfulness of this offer, so different from the dictates she had known in Boston, touched Sarah deeply. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Though I suspect there may be talk in town when people hear of this." "Let them talk," Jackson said with a dismissive shrug. "Anyone who matters will understand that what's between us is no one's business but our own." A noise from the kitchen doorway made them both turn. Daniel stood there, flour dusting his clothes and a confused expression on his face as he looked between them. "Papa, are you and Miss Sarah having a fight?" he asked cautiously. Jackson smiled, releasing Sarah's hand but staying close beside her. "No, son, quite the opposite, in fact. Miss Sarah and I were just discussing something very important." Daniel's eyes widened. "Is it a secret?" "I'm good at keeping secrets, Papa. Mrs. Rodriguez says so." "It's not a secret," Sarah told him gently, "but it is something we'd like to talk to you about. You see, your father has asked me to stay here at the ranch, not just as your teacher but as part of your family." The boy's face lit up with excitement. "Forever, like Papa said when he caught you." Sarah glanced at Jackson, who was watching his son with a mixture of amusement and trepidation. "Yes, Daniel, forever, if that's all right with you." For a moment, the child seemed to consider this seriously. Then he nodded as if coming to an important decision. "It's all right. But you have to promise not to make me do arithmetic on my birthday. And you have to learn how to make cookies like Mrs. Rodriguez. And you should probably marry Papa, because Tommy Wilson at church says when people love each other, they get married. Do you love Papa?" The directness of the question, so like his father's straightforward manner, made Sarah laugh even as she felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Yes, Daniel, I do love your Papa. And I love Miss Sarah," Jackson added, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "Very much." Daniel nodded again, satisfied. "Good. Then you should definitely get married. Can I go tell Mrs. Rodriguez? She said I couldn't come out until the cookies were done, but this is important news." Without waiting for an answer, he darted back into the kitchen, his excited voice carrying clearly. "Mrs. Rodriguez, Papa and Miss Sarah are in love and they're going to get married, and Miss Sarah is going to stay forever." Left alone again, Sarah and Jackson exchanged a look of mixed amusement and embarrassment. "Well," Jackson said dryly, "I had planned to court you properly before proposing, but it seems my son has other ideas." "Daniel does tend to speak his mind," Sarah agreed, unable to suppress a smile. "I wonder where he gets that from," Jackson chuckled, then grew serious again. "He's right, though. I do want to marry you, Sarah. Not immediately. I know we need time to get to know each other better to be sure this is right for all of us. But someday, when you're ready." The consideration in his offer, so different from Theodore Blackburn's peremptory proposal or her father's cold arrangements, warmed Sarah's heart. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like that very much. Someday." From the kitchen came the sound of Mrs. Rodriguez's exclamations, a mixture of Spanish and English that suggested both surprise and approval. Soon, Sarah knew, the news would spread to the ranch hands and from them to town. There would be talk, perhaps even disapproval from some quarters. But standing here, with Jackson's steady presence beside her and the knowledge of Daniel's eager acceptance, none of that seemed to matter. She had jumped from a burning stagecoach into the arms of a man who had asked her to stay forever. And against all odds, against all her careful plans for independence, she had found herself saying yes. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and planning. True to Jackson's word, he made no attempt to rush their courtship, despite Daniel's frequent inquiries about when the wedding would take place. Instead, they settled into a new rhythm, with Sarah dividing her time between teaching Daniel, helping Mrs. Rodriguez with household management, and spending quiet evenings with Jackson after the boy was asleep. During these evenings, they really talked, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for their futures, and thoughts on everything from ranching techniques to literature to child rearing. Sarah discovered that, beneath Jackson's sometimes gruff exterior, lay a thoughtful, intelligent man who had read widely despite limited formal education, and who harbored a quiet passion for justice that had led him to serve in the Union Army during the war. Jackson, in turn, seemed fascinated by Sarah's descriptions of Boston society, though he often expressed disbelief at its rigid constraints. "You mean to tell me," he said one evening after she had explained the elaborate ritual of formal dinner parties, "that people actually cared which fork you used for fish?" Sarah laughed, enjoying his incredulity. "Oh, that was just the beginning. There were rules for everything: how long one could stay at a social call, which topics were acceptable for conversation, even the precise angle at which a lady should hold her fan to signal interest or disinterest in a potential suitor. And you never found all this suffocating?" Jackson asked, genuinely curious. "Always," Sarah admitted. "Even as a child, I chafed against it. My mother understood she had been somewhat rebellious in her youth, or so she told me, but after she died, there was no one to buffer between my father's expectations and my own desires." She sighed, the old hurt less sharp now but still present. He wasn't a cruel man, truly, just rigid, conventional, unable to understand why his daughter wouldn't simply do what was expected of her. Jackson reached across the small space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "His loss is my gain," he said softly. "If you had been the obedient daughter he wanted, you would never have boarded that stagecoach. And I would never have flown through the air into the arms of a handsome rancher," Sarah finished with a smile. "Fate works in mysterious ways." As October approached, bringing with it Daniel's 5th birthday, Sarah moved back to the foreman's cabin, which had been significantly improved during her temporary residence in the main house. Jackson had added bookshelves, curtains, and a small writing desk, while Mrs. Rodriguez had contributed colorful textiles and a rocking chair for the porch. It was a compromise that satisfied both Sarah's need for independence and Jackson's protective instincts, close enough to the main house for safety, yet separate enough to give her space of her own. The arrangement raised eyebrows in Los Alamos, of course. When Sarah accompanied Jackson and Daniel to church on Sundays, she could feel the speculative glances and hear the hushed whispers. But to her surprise, there was less outright disapproval than she had expected. Perhaps it was because Jackson was well respected in the community, or perhaps it was simply that the practical realities of frontier life left less room for rigid social conventions than Boston had. Sheriff Thompson, now a frequent visitor to the ranch as he developed a friendship with Jackson, summed it up neatly one evening after dinner. Folks in these parts generally figure a man and woman have the right to find happiness where they can, long as they're not hurting anybody. Life's too short and too hard out here for much else. Daniel's birthday fell on a crisp autumn day. The aspens in the surrounding mountains turned to gold, and the air carrying the first hint of winter. Mrs. Rodriguez outdid herself with a feast that included all the boys' favorites, culminating in a chocolate cake that had Daniel wide-eyed with anticipation. "Can I open my presents now, Papa?" he asked as soon as the last bite of cake had been consumed, practically bouncing in his seat. Jackson laughed, exchanging an amused glance with Sarah. "I suppose so. Why don't you start with this one?" He handed his son a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Daniel tore into it eagerly, revealing a small but finely crafted leather saddle. "My own saddle," he exclaimed, running his hands over it reverently. "Does this mean—" "It does," Jackson confirmed, his eyes warm with affection. "Tomorrow we'll go choose a pony from the new string. You're old enough now to start learning to ride properly." Daniel's whoop of joy was almost deafening, and it took several minutes of excited chatter before he was calm enough to open his other gifts, a carved wooden train from Sheriff Thompson, a new storybook from Mrs. Rodriguez, and from Sarah, a journal bound in soft leather. "It's for writing down your thoughts and discoveries," she explained as Daniel examined it curiously, "like a scientist or an explorer. And look," she pointed to the first page where she had carefully inscribed his name, "it's already started for you." "Daniel James Zimmerman," the boy reads slowly, his face screwed up in concentration. Then, with a burst of pride, "I read that all by myself." "You did," Sarah confirmed, her heart swelling with both pride in his accomplishment and love for this earnest, joyful child who had so quickly become dear to her. "You're becoming quite the scholar." Later, after Daniel had been put to bed with his new saddle positioned where he could see it first thing upon waking, Sarah and Jackson sat on the porch of the main house, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. A comfortable silence had fallen between them, the kind that comes only with deep understanding and mutual respect. "Daniel loved his gifts," Sarah observed after a while. "Especially the saddle. He's going to be impossible to get to his lessons tomorrow, you know." Jackson chuckled. "I figured we might take a day off from formal schooling, call it a practical lesson in horsemanship instead." "Very wise," Sarah agreed with a smile. Then, more seriously, "He's growing so fast, Jackson. It seems like just yesterday he was showing me his wobbly alphabet, and now he's reading words on his own." "Children do that," Jackson said softly. Emma used to say that parenthood was a series of small heartbreaks, watching them need you a little less each day as they learn to do things for themselves. Sarah glanced at him, touched by the gentle melancholy in his voice. She must have been a wonderful mother. She was. Jackson's gaze remained on the stars, but his hand found Sarah's in the darkness. And she would have been glad to know that Daniel has you in his life now. Someone who values education as she did. Someone who sees the unique spark in him and nurtures it. The vote of confidence from Emma, even posthumously and through Jackson's interpretation, meant more to Sarah than she could express. "I hope I can live up to that," she said simply. They sat in silence for a few more moments, hands linked, before Jackson cleared his throat. "I have something for you too," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Not a birthday gift exactly, but, well, see for yourself." From his pocket, he withdrew a small package, similar to those Daniel had opened earlier but more carefully wrapped. Sarah took it with curious fingers, untying the string and folding back the paper to reveal a small velvet box. Her heart began to race as she opened it. Inside, nestled against dark fabric, was a ring, a simple but elegant design, a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires on a gold band. "It was my mother's," Jackson explained, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. "I had it sent from Colorado. I know we agreed to take things slowly, and this doesn't have to mean tomorrow or next week or even next month. But I wanted you to have something tangible, something that shows my intention, my commitment to you." Sarah lifted the ring from its box, watching as it caught the starlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like you," Jackson replied simply. "Sarah Vaughn, I'm not asking you to answer now. But when you're ready, truly ready, will you marry me? Be a mother to Daniel and a partner to me. Share this life with all its hardships and joys." Sarah looked from the ring to the man beside her, this steadfast, honorable man who had caught her when she fell, and who now offered her not just his heart, but a future brighter than any she had dared imagine when she fled Boston. "Yes," she said, the word coming easily, naturally, as if it had been waiting on her lips for this exact moment. "Yes, Jackson Zimmerman, I will marry you. Not because I need a protector or a provider, but because I love you, because together we're stronger and better than either of us alone." Jackson's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He took the ring from her fingers and slid it onto her hand, where it fit as if it had been made for her. "When?" he asked simply. Sarah considered. The practical choice would be spring, after the worst of winter had passed. But suddenly, waiting even those few months seemed unnecessary, a concession to convention rather than a reflection of their feelings. "Christmas," she decided. "If that's not too soon for the preparations. I don't want anything elaborate, just us, Daniel, Mrs. Rodriguez, and perhaps a few close friends." "Christmas it is," Jackson agreed, his voice warm with approval. "A new beginning at the end of the year." He leaned in, sealing their agreement with a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. As they sat together under the vast New Mexico sky, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had brought her here. The restrictive life in Boston, the desperate flight west, the terrifying moment of jumping from a burning stagecoach, all leading to this moment of perfect certainty, of knowing she had found her place and her people. "Stay forever," Jackson had said when he caught her that fateful day. And now, with his ring on her finger and his future entwined with hers, Sarah knew that she would. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with a fresh dusting of snow that transformed the ranch into a glistening wonderland. Sarah stood at the window of the foreman's cabin, her home, for just a few more hours, watching as the rising sun turned the white landscape to gold. In the main house, she knew, preparations would already be underway. Mrs. Rodriguez had declared that not even Christmas would interfere with a proper wedding feast and had been cooking and baking for days. A knock at the door pulled Sarah from her reverie. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Rodriguez with breakfast or perhaps one of the ranch wives who had come to help her dress. Instead, to her surprise, Sheriff Thompson entered, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean shirt and polished boots. "Miss Vaughn," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Sheriff," Sarah assured him, curious about this unexpected visit. "Is everything all right?" Thompson shifted somewhat awkwardly, clearly outside his comfort zone. "Everything's fine. Well, I have something for you. A wedding gift of sorts, though it's not exactly traditional." From inside his coat, he withdrew an official-looking document and handed it to Sarah. "This arrived from Boston yesterday. I would have brought it sooner, but the snow delayed the mail." Sarah took the document with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. The Boston return address was painfully familiar, her father's law office. With slightly trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the thick paper. It was a letter, written in her father's precise hand but lacking his usual formality. "My dear Sarah, news travels slowly to Boston from the territories, but word has reached me of your recent adventures and your upcoming marriage. I must confess that learning of your narrow escape from the Stagecoach robbery filled me with a terror I had not known since your mother's final illness. The thought that I might have lost you without ever having the chance to make amends for my rigidity is more painful than I can express. I have enclosed with this letter the documents transferring your inheritance from your grandmother's estate, which I have held in trust. It is rightfully yours, and I have no desire to withhold it any longer. I have also included a draft on my account at First Boston Bank, a wedding gift which I hope you will accept as a token of my sincere wish for your happiness. If it is not too presumptuous, I would very much like to visit you in the spring to meet the man who has won your heart and the child you will soon call son. I understand if this is unwelcome, but I hope you will consider it. Your loving father, Judge William Vaughn." Sarah stared at the letter, tears blurring her vision. After months of silence, after she had resigned herself to being cut off from her only remaining family, this unexpected olive branch left her speechless. "Sheriff," she finally managed, "how did my father know where to find me? Or about the wedding?" Thompson looked slightly sheepish. "That might be my doing. After the business with Rollins and his gang, I filed a report with the territorial governor. Standard procedure when a stagecoach is robbed. I mentioned you by name and that you were residing at the Zimmerman ranch. The governor's office must have forwarded the information to Boston when inquiries were made." Sarah nodded slowly, processing this. "And the wedding, Mrs. Rodriguez may have mentioned it when she was ordering supplies for today's feast," the sheriff admitted. "Word gets around, especially news as welcome as this." Folding the letter carefully, Sarah slipped it into her pocket along with the legal documents, which she had barely glanced at. The money, the inheritance, they were secondary to the olive branch her father had extended, the acknowledgement of her right to choose her own path. "Thank you for bringing this," she told Thompson sincerely. It's more meaningful than you can know." The sheriff nodded, clearly relieved that his intrusion had been well received. "Zimmerman's a good man," he said gruffly. "One of the best I know. I'm glad things worked out this way." As Thompson took his leave, Sarah found herself smiling at his understated blessing. From a man like the sheriff, it was high praise indeed. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with a breakfast tray and two of the neighboring ranch wives, all determined to ensure that Sarah would be a vision when she walked down the makeshift aisle in the Zimmerman living room. Her dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that one of the women had helped her sew, was carefully arranged, her hair styled, and her nerves soothed with gentle assurances and practical advice. "Every bride is nervous," Mrs. Peterson, the oldest of the women, told her kindly. "Even when you're marrying the man you love, especially then, perhaps." Sarah smiled gratefully at the older woman. "It's not doubt," she assured her. "More amazement. 6 months ago I was in Boston, facing a future I dreaded. Now I'm here, about to marry a man I love more than I thought possible and become mother to a child who has already claimed my heart. Life has a way of surprising us," Mrs. Rodriguez observed sagely. "My Carlos, may he rest in peace, always said that God laughs when we make plans." By noon, Sarah was ready, her simple veil in place, and her grandmother's pearl earrings the only jewelry she had managed to keep with her during her journey west, adorning her ears. The letter from her father was tucked into a small pocket sewn into her dress, a tangible reminder that bridges could be rebuilt, that the future need not be constrained by the past. Daniel, sent by his father to escort the bride, appeared at the cabin door promptly at 12:15, his small face solemn with the importance of his mission. He had been bathed, combed, and dressed in a new suit that made him look suddenly older, more like the boy he was becoming than the child he had been. "Papa says it's time," he announced, his eyes widening as he took in Sarah's appearance. "You look like an angel, Miss Sarah." "Like the ones in the Bible pictures at church," Sarah laughed, touched by his innocent compliment. "Thank you, Daniel. You look very handsome yourself. Are you ready to walk me to your father?" The boy nodded eagerly, offering his arm just as Jackson must have shown him. "I practiced," he confided as they began the short walk to the main house, snow crunching beneath their feet. "Papa says I have to walk slow and steady, not run like when we're playing." "Your papa is very wise," Sarah agreed, matching her pace to Daniel's careful steps. The main room of the Zimmerman house had been transformed for the occasion. Evergreen boughs decorated the walls, their fresh scent mingling with the aroma of beeswax candles and Mrs. Rodriguez's cooking. A small harmonium, borrowed from the church in Los Alamos, had been set up in one corner, with the minister's wife ready to play the wedding march. As Sarah and Daniel approached the house, the music began, a slightly wavering but heartfelt rendition of the traditional tune. Daniel, taking his role with utmost seriousness, led Sarah through the door and into the room where a small gathering of friends and neighbors had assembled. But Sarah had eyes only for Jackson, standing before the fireplace with the minister. He wore a new suit, his usually untamed hair neatly combed, but it was his expression that caught and held her attention, a look of such love and wonder that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. As Daniel delivered her to his father's side and took his own place as ring-bearer, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, with these two people who had become her family in the truest sense of the word. The ceremony itself was simple and traditional, with vows that had been spoken by countless couples before them. Yet as Jackson's strong, steady voice promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life, and as Sarah made the same vows in return, the ancient words felt new, personal, sacred. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson lifted her veil with gentle hands and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the man he was, strong yet gentle, passionate yet respectful. The small assembly broke into applause, led by Daniel's enthusiastic clapping and cheers. The celebration that followed was everything Sarah could have wished for: warm, intimate, filled with laughter and good food, and the genuine goodwill of people who had become not just neighbors but friends. Sheriff Thompson proposed a toast to the bride and groom, his customary gruffness giving way to a surprising eloquence as he spoke of new beginnings and second chances. As the winter afternoon light began to fade, the guests departed, leaving only the new family and Mrs. Rodriguez, who insisted on clearing away at least the worst of the mess before heading to her sister's house in town, where she would stay for the next few days to give the newlyweds privacy. Once she had gone, with many hugs and a few happy tears, Sarah and Jackson found themselves alone with Daniel, who was beginning to droop with exhaustion after the excitement of the day. "Time for bed, young man," Jackson said, scooping his son into his arms. "You've been the perfect gentleman today, but even gentlemen need their sleep." "But it's still Christmas," Daniel protested weakly, fighting a yawn. "And you and Miss Sarah, Mama Sarah just got married. Don't married people have a party?" Sarah's heart swelled at the child's use of Mama Sarah, a name they had discussed and agreed upon in the weeks leading up to the wedding. It acknowledged both his birth mother's place in his heart and Sarah's new role in his life. "We did have a party," she reminded him gently, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "A wonderful one. And tomorrow is still Christmas too. We'll have plenty of time for more celebrating then." This logic seemed to satisfy Daniel, who allowed himself to be carried upstairs to his room. Sarah followed, and together she and Jackson tucked the boy into bed, an ordinary nightly ritual that felt extraordinarily meaningful on this of all nights. "I love you, Mama Sarah," Daniel murmured sleepily as she leaned down to kiss his forehead. "And I love you, Papa." This was the best Christmas ever. "It certainly was," Jackson agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Sleep well, son." As they closed Daniel's door and moved back downstairs, Sarah felt a momentary shyness descend. This was her wedding night, after all, and while she and Jackson had discussed the physical aspects of marriage with frankness and mutual respect, the reality of it now loomed before her. Jackson seemed to sense her nervousness. Taking her hand, he led her not to the bedroom but back to the main room, where the fire still burned brightly in the hearth. "I have something for you," he said, releasing her hand to retrieve a package from beneath the small Christmas tree that stood in the corner. "A wedding gift." Sarah smiled, grateful for the momentary reprieve from her own racing thoughts. "I have something for you too," she admitted, crossing to where her shawl hung by the door and withdrawing a small parcel from its folds. "Though it's not nearly as fine as that ring you gave me." They settled on the sofa before the fire, the remains of the day's celebration around them creating an atmosphere of intimate celebration. Jackson insisted she open his gift first, watching with barely concealed eagerness as she unwrapped a leather-bound volume. "Oh, Jackson," she breathed as she read the title, "The Complete Works of Shakespeare." Opening it, she found an inscription on the flyleaf in his strong, sure handwriting, "To Sarah, who flew into my life and taught me to hope again. All my love, Jackson." "It's perfect," she told him sincerely, running her fingers over the fine binding. "I mentioned once, just in passing, that I had left my Shakespeare collection behind in Boston. I can't believe you remembered." "I remember everything you say," Jackson replied simply. "Everything that matters to you matters to me." Blinking back tears of happiness, Sarah handed him her own gift, much smaller, wrapped in a scrap of blue silk and tied with a silver ribbon. "It's not much," she warned as he began to unwrap it. Inside was a pocket watch, silver and intricately engraved with a pattern of leaves and vines. "It was my grandfather's," Sarah explained as Jackson examined it with appreciative eyes. "My mother gave it to me before she died, but it never seemed right for me to keep it. I've been saving it, I think, for the right person. For you." Jackson opened the watch, finding inside a miniature daguerreotype that Sarah had commissioned from a traveling photographer who had passed through Los Alamos in November, a portrait of herself and Daniel, the boy sitting on her lap with his characteristic wide grin. "Sarah," Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion, I don't have words for what this means to me." "Then don't use words," Sarah suggested softly, setting aside her own gift and moving closer to him on the sofa. "Show me." And he did, drawing her into an embrace that spoke of love, desire, and a lifetime's promise. As the firelight danced across their faces and the clock ticked toward midnight, Sarah knew that her impulsive jump from a burning stagecoach had been more than an escape. It had been a leap of faith, carrying her not just away from danger but toward a future brighter than she could have imagined. In Jackson's arms, with Daniel sleeping peacefully upstairs and the promise of a new day, a new life ahead, Sarah Zimmerman found herself exactly where she was meant to be. Spring came to the New Mexico territory in a riot of wildflowers and new life. The Zimmerman Ranch, always a place of industry and purpose, seemed to take on a new vitality under the joint stewardship of Jackson and Sarah. The winter had been harsh at times, with blizzards that confined them to the house for days, but they had weathered it together, finding joy in simple pleasures and family closeness. Daniel, now 5.5 and riding his pony with growing confidence, had blossomed under Sarah's tutelage. His reading had advanced remarkably, and he took particular delight in the nature studies that Sarah incorporated into his lessons, collecting specimens of plants and insects with scientific enthusiasm. As for Sarah herself, she had found that marriage to Jackson enhanced rather than diminished her sense of independence. He consulted her on ranch decisions, valued her opinions, and supported her when she proposed starting a small school for the children of neighboring ranches and the ranch hands' families. 3 days a week, the foreman's cabin, which Jackson had expanded over the winter to include a proper schoolroom, was filled with the voices of children learning their letters and numbers, exploring the world through books and Sarah's innovative teaching methods. It was after one such school day, as Sarah was tidying up the classroom and reflecting on her students' progress, that she heard the sound of an approaching carriage. Visitors to the ranch were common enough, but usually came on horseback. A carriage suggested someone from town, perhaps even an official visitor. Stepping onto the porch, Sarah shaded her eyes against the spring sunshine. The carriage was unfamiliar, finer than most seen in Los Alamos, with a driver in a dark coat handling the team of matching bays. As it drew closer, her heart began to race as she recognized the tall, distinguished figure seated inside a figure she had not seen in nearly a year, but would know anywhere: her father. He had written to say he was coming, of course. Sarah had responded with a cautious but genuine invitation, and Jackson had supported her desire for reconciliation. But seeing him now, actually here at the ranch that had become her home, brought a rush of conflicting emotions that left her momentarily rooted to the spot. The carriage came to a stop before the cabin, and Judge William Vaughn descended, looking remarkably unchanged from Sarah's memories. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, his bearing as upright as ever. But as he approached, she noticed subtle differences, new lines around his eyes, a certain hesitancy in his step that had not been there before. "Sarah," he said, his voice catching slightly on her name. "You look radiant." For a moment, neither moved. Then, prompted by something she couldn't name, perhaps the vulnerability in his eyes, or simply the passage of time that had softened old hurts, Sarah stepped forward and embraced her father. He stiffened briefly in surprise, then his arms came around her, holding her with a tenderness she had rarely felt from him as a child. "Welcome to our home, Father," she said when they parted, both a bit misty-eyed. "I'm so glad you came." Judge Vaughn looked around, taking in the simple cabin with its attached schoolroom, the ranch buildings visible in the distance, and the majestic mountains beyond. "It's beautiful," he said with what sounded like genuine appreciation. "Different from anything I imagined, but beautiful." Sarah smiled, recognizing in his words an effort to understand her choices. "Come," she said, taking his arm. "Let me show you the main house and introduce you to Jackson and Daniel. They're both very eager to meet you." As they walked toward the ranch house, her father asked about her school, showing unexpected interest in her teaching methods and the progress of her students. Sarah found herself warming to his questions, describing with enthusiasm the children's curiosity and the joy she found in nurturing their minds. "You always did love learning," Judge Vaughn remarked as they neared the house. "Even as a small child, you wanted to know the why of everything. It drove your mother to distraction sometimes, though she always encouraged it." The mention of her mother without the usual accompanying sadness was another surprise. "She would have loved it here," Sarah said softly. "All this open space, the freedom." Her father nodded, a distant look in his eyes. "Yes, she would have. Catherine was never truly comfortable with Boston society, though she navigated it gracefully for my sake. I sometimes think—" He hesitated, then continued with what seemed like an effort. "I sometimes think I failed to honor her spirit in how I raised you after she was gone. I tried to shape you into what I thought a proper Boston lady should be, rather than seeing the independent soul you inherited from her." The admission, so unexpected and so fundamental, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you for saying that," she managed after a moment. "It means more than you know." Before they could continue this fragile new understanding, the front door of the ranch house opened, and Jackson emerged, Daniel at his side. They made a striking pair, Jackson tall and broad-shouldered in his work clothes, Daniel a miniature version with the same direct gaze and forthright stance. "You must be Judge Vaughn," Jackson said, stepping forward with extended hand. "Welcome to our home. I'm Jackson Zimmerman." Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and nervousness as the two most important men in her life sized each other up. They were a study in contrast, her father in his Eastern finery, Jackson in his practical Western attire, yet both possessed the same essential quality of integrity that she had come to value above all else. "Mr. Zimmerman," Judge Vaughn replied, shaking Jackson's hand firmly. "I'm pleased to finally meet the man who won my daughter's heart. And this must be young Daniel," he added, turning his attention to the boy who was regarding him with undisguised curiosity. "Are you really a judge?" Daniel asked without preamble. "Sheriff Thompson says judges can send bad people to jail forever and ever." Judge Vaughn's eyebrows rose, but to Sarah's relief, his lips twitched into what might have been a smile. "That's essentially correct, young man, though we generally try to make the punishment fit the crime." Daniel considered this seriously. "Papa says you're Mama Sarah's father. That makes you my grandfather, right?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Judge Vaughn off guard. He glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Daniel. "I suppose it does, if that's agreeable to you." "It is," Daniel decided after a moment's thought. "I never had a grandfather before. Do you know how to fish? Papa's teaching me, but I'm not very good at it yet." And just like that, the tension dissipated. Judge Vaughn admitted that he had indeed fished as a boy in Massachusetts, though it had been many years, and Daniel immediately volunteered to show him the best spots in the creek that ran through the ranch property. Jackson, catching Sarah's eye with a smile that spoke volumes about his love and support, invited everyone inside for the dinner that Mrs. Rodriguez had been preparing in honor of their guest. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Judge Vaughn, to Sarah's continued surprise, showed genuine interest in ranch life, accompanying Jackson on his daily rounds and asking thoughtful questions about cattle management and land use. He sat in on one of Sarah's school sessions, watching with evident pride as she guided her students through a geography lesson. And he spent hours with Daniel, patiently teaching the boy to tie fishing flies and telling him stories of Sarah's childhood that made her alternately blush and laugh with nostalgia. In the evenings, after Daniel was in bed, the three adults would sit on the porch or by the fire, depending on the weather, and talk. Real, honest conversations about the past, the present, and the future. Judge Vaughn spoke of his loneliness after Sarah's departure, of his gradual realization that his rigidity had cost him his only child. Jackson shared stories of his time in the war, of meeting and losing Emma, of his determination to give Daniel a childhood filled with love and security. And Sarah, feeling a new freedom to express herself with both men, talked of her dreams for her school, her love for her new family, and her hope that the future might include regular visits between New Mexico and Boston, building a bridge across the geographical and emotional distance that had separated father and daughter for too long. On the evening before Judge Vaughn was scheduled to depart, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, he cleared his throat in a way that Sarah recognized as a prelude to something important. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone more hesitant than she was accustomed to hearing from him, "about my house in Boston. It's far too large for one person, especially now that—" He glanced at Sarah. "Well, now that I've seen where my heart truly lies." Jackson and Sarah exchanged a curious look. "What are you saying, Father?" she prompted gently. "I'm saying that I'm considering selling the Boston house and purchasing something more modest, perhaps even relocating." Judge Vaughn looked out at the landscape, his expression thoughtful. "Not immediately, of course. There are cases to resolve, affairs to put in order. But in a year or two, I find myself drawn to the idea of a fresh start, somewhere where an old judge might be useful and where he might see more of his daughter and grandson." Sarah felt her heart swell with a joy she hadn't anticipated. "You mean, you'd move to New Mexico, to the Los Alamos area specifically," her father confirmed with a slight smile. "If that wouldn't be unwelcome." "Unwelcome," Sarah repeated, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Father, nothing would make me happier." Jackson, who had been quietly listening, now spoke up. "Judge Vaughn, you'd be more than welcome. Los Alamos is growing, and with that growth comes a need for men of law and experience. I can think of several community leaders who would be eager to have someone of your background contribute to the town's development." Judge Vaughn nodded, looking genuinely pleased by this reception of his idea. "It's not a decision to be made lightly, of course. But this past week has shown me that there's more to life than Boston society and legal precedents. There's family. Theirs." He gestured to the breathtaking landscape before them. "All this, a kind of beauty and freedom I had forgotten existed." As the conversation turned to practical matters, potential properties in town, the needs of the growing community, the logistics of such a significant move, Sarah found herself filled with a sense of completion she hadn't known she was missing. Her father, once the embodiment of the constraints she had fled, was now proposing to join the life she had chosen. Not to control or direct, but to be part of it, to contribute in his own way. Later that night, after her father had retired to the guest room and she and Jackson were preparing for bed, Sarah shared this feeling with her husband. "It feels like a circle closing," she explained, sitting at the small vanity as she brushed her hair. When I left Boston, I was running away from his expectations, from a future that felt like a cage. Now he's coming here, embracing the very life I chose for myself." Jackson, watching her from their bed, smiled with understanding. "People change, Sarah. Sometimes they just need a reason to see things differently." "You were my reason," she said softly, setting down her brush and joining him. "You and Daniel, the family I found when I wasn't even looking for one." Jackson drew her close, his strength as always tempered with gentleness. "I remember that day so clearly," he murmured against her hair. "Looking up to see this beautiful woman falling through the air, her dress like a blue sail against the sky. I acted on instinct, catching you, but saying stay forever." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "That wasn't instinct. That was my heart recognizing its match, even if my head wasn't ready to understand it yet." Sarah reached up to touch his face, the face that had become as dear and necessary to her as her own reflection. "I'm glad I jumped," she whispered. "And I'm even more glad you caught me." As they settled into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms in the home they had built together, Sarah reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought her here. From a burning stagecoach to a loving marriage, from flight to belonging, from isolation to a family that now promised to expand in ways she could never have anticipated. Outside, the New Mexico night spread its tapestry of stars over the land they both loved, a land that had given Sarah Zimmerman not just a new home, but a new beginning. And as she drifted toward dreams, she knew with complete certainty that she would indeed stay forever, held safe in the arms of the cowboy who had caught her when she fell, and in doing so, had caught her heart as well.